landmark decision, Saudi Arabia has officially abolished its decades-old Kafala system, a major labor reform that will change the lives of millions of migrant workers. This historic move marks a significant step towards improving labor rights and migrant welfare in the kingdom. The reform is expected to benefit around 13 million foreign workers, many of whom come from about South and Southeast Asia. But what exactly was the Kafala system and why has its abolition become such a crucial development? Well, let's find out. I am Shivangi and you are watching India TV. So first of all, let's understand what was the Kafala system. The word Kafala means sponsorship in Arabic, but it came to symbolize a highly controlling and exploitative system of labor in the Gulf. It was introduced in the 1950s. The Kafala system was created to manage the influx of foreign labor needed to support the booming oil economies of the Gulf. Now let's understand how did this system work. Well, every foreign worker was tied to a local sponsor or kafil who had complete control over their employment, residency and legal status. Workers could not change jobs, leave the country or even seek legal assistance without the sponsor's permission. Notably, with 13.4 million migrant workers making up to 42% of the kingdom's population, Saudi Arabia heavily depends on foreign labor across sectors like construction, agriculture and domestic work. And many of these workers come from countries like India, Bangladesh, Nepal and the Philippines. But later on, there were many concerns regarding this Kafala system. Over time, the system led to widespread exploitation. Employers could confiscate workers' passports, they could withhold or delay wages, or they could limit workers' freedom of movement. Rights groups described it as a form of modern-day slavery, and it also argued that it stripped workers of basic freedoms and left them vulnerable to severe mistreatment, including forced labor. Moreover, domestic workers, especially women, were particularly affected as they lived in isolation with little legal protection. They faced abuse, overwork and unpaid wages with limited means of recourse. And then the system came under increasing international scrutiny as well, especially from human rights groups and organizations like the International Labour Organization or the ILO. Therefore, Saudi Arabia's decision to end Kafala follows similar steps taken by other Gulf countries as well, such as Qatar, which revised its labor laws before the 2022 FIFA World Cup. But how abolishing the Kafala system will impact workers? Well, the new reform gives migrant workers much needed freedom and autonomy. They no longer need their employer's approval to change jobs or leave the country. The reform also expands access to labor courts and complaint mechanisms, allowing workers to report violations and seek justice more effectively. Overall, the abolition of Kafala system is a monumental step forward for migrant workers in Saudi Arabia, providing them with more freedom and protection. It is also a key part of Saudi Arabia's broader effort to modernize and move away from outdated practices. Now, while challenges remain, this change reflects the kingdom's commitment to improve its labor practices and setting an example for the region. Were you aware of this information or not? Do comment and let us know, and keep watching India TV.